Student housing is such a unique industry. The more unique an industry is, the more important it is for that industry to have a resource and a platform to share ideas and data, to determine best practices, and a platform to simply promote networking among the professionals in that industry. That's what we are setting out to provide with Student Housing Insight. But what's even more unique about the student housing industry is how unique those professionals are. They want to make a positive impact on the students and the university communities they serve. They understand they have an opportunity to touch the future. They come to work every day looking for ways to make that future bright. If you're one of those people, come be a part of Student Housing Insight. Well, welcome to Shop Talk, everyone. This is being hosted by Student Housing Insight. I'm Wesley Dees. I'm the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If you're joining us for the first time and you haven't heard anything about Student Housing Insight, we are a platform for student housing professionals to network and share ideas. You can find out more by going to studenthousinginsight.com. Again, welcome to Shop Talk. This is the monthly webinar for the student housing industry in the U.S. Each month, we provide updates on how pre-leasing is going across the country, as well as policy and legislative updates. So if you will, want to talk really quick about some of the housekeeping for this. We want this to be interactive, so feel free to use the chat on the right side of your screen to voice any comments. We can, if you'll see that there on the right-hand side down at the bottom. And then also, if you've got any questions for our panelists, make sure that you mark those with a Q in the same chat comment section, just so that way I can see it. So, all right, well, let's get started. We're going to jump in first to policy and legislative update. So let me bring up our good friend Dave Borsos from NMHC. Dave.
Wes.
Well, I think I kind of lost the bet because I didn't know that if we would get to the next Shop Talk, if we would actually know who the president-elect was. So we're we're there. We know who it is, and you've and because of that, you've deserved your own graphic today.
There we go. How about that? That may or may not be a good thing. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think a lot of us thought we may not have known who was getting elected by this point in time, but clearly there was a mandate that was given by the people and who they voted for, et cetera. So, and I think today it's kind of been on and off, formally announced that the House has also gone to the Republicans. So they have a trifecta, which obviously makes any of the agenda for the incoming president a little bit easier to pass. I will tell you, in the past, just because a president has had both the House and the Senate didn't necessarily mean that they got everything passed. And that has happened whether they're Democrats or Republicans, including during the first administration with President Trump. He didn't get everything done you thought he would have gotten done. So with that in mind, I thought it would be a good time to at least just kind of give the people on the call a little bit of our thoughts in terms of what we think may be an impact to the student housing industry, because there's an awful lot of stuff going on. I don't expect that most of you on the call would kind of watch and monitor all the appointments as closely as we do. That's kind of what our job is to do. Some of them have been relatively surprising so far, and remains to be seen what the impacts are. But and so far, all of the ones that have been appointed, quite honestly, have had projected little or no impact on our industry. That there's really kind of three appointments, actually four, that we would be looking for that we think has the most immediate impact. One would be who heads up Treasury, obviously, who heads up HUD, little bit less of an impact on the student housing industry, but clearly still an issue. And who heads up the FHFA, who's the regulator of Fannie and Freddie, in addition, the Federal Home Loan Banks. And then two others of interest, CFPB, which has been kind of focused on fees and, the term junk fees. And so I'll talk a little bit about kind of what our expectations there potentially as well. And then the last one is the Department of Education, and what impact potentially there, given that the president has said, I'm going to get rid of the Department of Education. So let me touch base. Let's start with kind of the impact to the capital markets. Obviously, our industry focuses on how do you get debt financing or financing for either construction or permanent financing for the buildings. And one of the larger providers of capital in the past has been Fannie and Freddie. There is, in the prior administration, in prior Trump administration, he asked both HUD and Treasury to come up with reform plans, and Treasury was responsible for the reform plan of FHFA/Fannie and Freddie. And if we use that kind of as a little bit of a guide, on the positive side, they're talking about that they would still have Fannie and Freddie be able to finance multifamily. The downside in that particular plan is it said they could only do low and moderate income properties. So that's probably a negative that we're going to have to spend a lot of time with incoming people on FHFA and Treasury to ensure that that's not what happens, because that could have a negative impact on the ability for the industry to access debt. Clearly, Class A, new construction, et cetera, would all be impacted by that. So remains to be seen what can happen there. But going to FHFA and kind of Fannie and Freddie being into conservatorship since 2008, and that's a focus of the incoming administration. They've been talking to us about this even before the election. And what does that look like? One, if they could do nothing, they can continue to regulate, because Fannie and Freddie are in a much different position they were in 2008 than they are today. They don't have a balance sheet as much as they did. They can't do as many different types of products that they did before, and they actually have, quite honestly, they're halfway to the capital that they would need to be able to release from conservatorship. So, a lot of the things have been positively impacted in terms of getting in that direction. To release from conservatorship, you have to have a negotiation between FHFA and Treasury, which is why, since they haven't named either one of those, clearly something that we're following. Does not involve Congress. They could negotiate between the two of them and they could release from conservatorship. That may be the most obvious thing that occurs. Then it would, in many ways, kind of look like what Fannie and Freddie were before. And then the last component would be if they really undertake a complete rethinking of what those enterprises do and what their business models are, that would involve Congress and way more complex, way more difficult. So if I were to put betting money on release from conservatorship, kind of everything somewhat stays the same, other than we're going to be watching to make sure that we don't get cut out of that. So with that in mind, one of the other things that we would highly expect, and I think both from a front end perspective, but especially on kind of the operational side, deregulation. In the last Trump administration, they had a mandate that for every new regulation, they'd have to get rid of 2. And so we expect something similar in that regard. And so one, we would expect that new regulation issuance is going to dramatically slow down. And quite honestly, between now and January, when new administration comes in, I wouldn't expect anything major to occur. So a lot of that will slow down. And quite honestly, even if there has been a regulation put in place, if the incoming administration doesn't support it, they can slow it down. They can defund. There's any number of different ways instead of absolutely getting rid of stuff. So I would certainly expect that we will see some rollback of regulations. And some of them may be regarding EPA, which put out a lot of appliance proposed rules which have a dramatic impact on our industry in terms of kind of updated appliances, et cetera. We think a lot of that, which we have been issuing a huge number of comment letters to the current administration's EPA efforts, we think a lot of that will be rolled back. So there'll be a net positive for the industry as it pertains to what we think may be impacts on what appliances you have to buy and replace, et cetera. So it's something I think is critically important for us to watch, and I think it'll be a positive development. As it pertains to the Department of Education, I know the president said he's going to get rid of it, but there's actually not an ability to eliminate the Department of Education. You have to get a supermajority in Senate. If 60 votes to do that, it's just not going to happen. So what can you do? You can fund it less. You can ask them to do less than what they've been asked, and fewer regulations, et cetera. So there'll still be an administration of student loans and other things of that nature, which are critical to our industry. I don't think that's going to go away, but other types of initiatives that may not be viewed favorably by the incoming administration will be slow walked or resources shifted away from it. Their definitions of thing that may be woke, using their terminology, you're not going to see a lot of that being pushed. It's going to be much more administratively, which would be, from our perspective, in order to continue to get students loans, is going to be a positive impact for our industry. So I would don't listen to DOE being wiped out. That won't happen. It's impossible. Immigration, clearly a big focus, and I would expect that that certainly will get a lot more funding and a lot more focus. As it pertains to labor impacts, et cetera. Realistically, are people hiring illegal immigrants? The answer is probably yes in certain situations. I guess the part that has certainly been talked about a lot, and we really don't know at this particular point in time, will there be deportation? We just don't know the answer to that. But legal immigration and access to certain categories through like H-1B visas is probably also going to be slowed down. So to that end, access to labor, which I think is already an issue for our industry, may be impacted by some of the changes in immigrations, et cetera. So overall, in terms of regulations, in terms of things that have been pushed out in the past through the SEC, through the banking regulators, through technology, in terms of AI, all of those, in many ways, we think are going to be any of those regulations, which quite honestly we were pushing back on, maybe a favorable light here in terms of pushing back on some of the regulations that were potentially negatively impacting that. I think a lot of people have been worried about the use of algorithms, et cetera, and the Department of Justice being part of lawsuits. We think there's going to be a shift in what the Department of Justice is going to go after, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that will go away, because the most recent lawsuit that was filed this year with the DOJ had 8 states that filed them along with the DOJ. So what may happen is that we're going to see more state level pushing as opposed to federal level pushing. So stay tuned there. I think some things will lighten up from a federal perspective, but won't necessarily take the pressure off from some of the states who are continue to actively pursue that. And then with that in mind, I think, you're going to have to keep a pulse on what state and localities have been thinking about as it pertains to certain types of regulations that they may be in control of, given that they may not get the support of the federal government, but they may be pushing forward on that. So, again, while positive from a federal perspective, we may see some continued push from the state and localities. And the last thing is that, overall, and this is a Washington D.C. impact more than anything else, probably, is that there may be some downsizing in the federal government, whether it impacts our industries with those variety of agencies that I've mentioned remains to be seen. The ability to downsize, remove federal employees that are not politically appointed is a little bit more difficult than it is the political appointees. So that may be a little bit more of a talk and a bluster to say that, but it really may not result in anything that we see dramatic shifts and downsizing of the federal government. So I told Wes I'd talk a little bit longer because you had a little bit extra time. Happy to answer any questions if people have any concerns. Certainly willing to take any questions from anybody at this point.
I want to go back really quick to the immigration thing, kind of asking the reverse of it, because throughout the cycle, I've heard Trump talk about wanting to actually increase F1 visas, which for international recruitment of students, that would be a big thing. But I don't know how real. I mean, is that just like I said, you may not know the answer to this, but is that something that he can do by just giving the director of DOE the goal of doing that, or is that something that actually has to go through some type of process?
No, I mean, it's a great question, and there's an awful lot of processes that exist here in DC in terms of what you can or can't do through whether it's executive action, whether it's administratively through an agency. So they could actually do that without any input from Congress. So
Gotcha.
To the degree that they want to dial one of those up or down, they can certainly do that.
Gotcha. Any other kind of signals that we should be looking at, especially when it comes to some of the pullback on be it the regulations or going back to what you were talking about with I know there's some back and forth about who may be leading the Fed, but are there any signals there that we should kind of be looking out for that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because we don't know who's in place there yet, and so it's a little bit harder to kind of get that sense. I mean, think about the major exit poll question and issue that people had, and had to do with economy, right? And whether it's the price of bread and eggs, or whether it's just in general feeling about the economy, the big focus for the incoming administration is how do I impact the economy in a positive way. So part of that may have to do with interest rates, right? The front end of the curve, which is when we wait for Chairman Powell out of the Fed to kind of lower rates, which we did just right after the election. That's just the floating rate front side of the curve. The 10-year, which is kind of if you're going to get, whether it's a single family mortgage or whether it's a multifamily mortgage, that longer end of the curve is where things are typically priced off of. And the government, without any type of intervention, typically has no impact on that whatsoever. And if you look at it, the 10-year has gone way up since the election, right? And so if there's anything that he would ask the Fed to do, it would be to increase the balance sheet of the Fed by buying Treasury, their own paper and others, to drive down the interest rates on the longer end of the curve. And that could be a positive for everybody. It lowers mortgage rates for both single family and multifamily. That would certainly be a plus. That certainly is something that I think they're going to be focused on. the other things from an economy perspective, like immigration, I know people have that as an issue, but that has no impact on what you're, paying at the grocery store. And so the other question becomes, is there any way to look at lowering gas prices, right? And if you think about, where we were during the first Trump administration, there were some things that he had negotiations with the Saudis and the Russians that actually lowered some of the gas prices. So that's another one. So I think, signaling to the broader economy and the average person is how do, I'm driving down your borrowing costs on mortgages, I'm going to lower gas prices, and then can he has an impact on food prices in any way? And I haven't heard enough yet about whether that would be something that he could impact.
Well, and I brought on Rich a little bit earlier. We're gonna talk about LeaseCon, TurnCon in just a second. But Rich, not to put you on the spot, but obviously,
but he's going to.
Yeah, I'm going to. But obviously, running student housing business, you guys are covering a lot of these legislative policies, and I'm sure you guys may have some questions. So I want to give you the opportunity to put something in front of Dave that maybe the rest of us aren't thinking about.
Ooh, that's tough. I don't want to put Dave too much on the spot either, but I guess I would say, Dave, net, and I realize it's really hard to project, but do you think this administration will be better for the commercial real estate, multifamily, and student housing industries than a Harris administration would have been?
It's a good question. I think there's going to be some positive things for the industry. Look, one of the things, if you think about from what our role is at NMHC, is to, understand and look at regulations, legislation that impacts our industry. And there have been a lot of regulations that were put forth during the Biden administration, which, we viewed unfavorably and may get some positive results from that. On the same note, there's some other things like, that while the IRA, was a huge thing, it created a lot of jobs. There's a lot of manufacturing jobs. So, and a lot of that money has been spent. Plus, a lot of it went to our businesses where people were upgrading properties and had access to money to make them more energy efficient, et cetera, which goes to our bottom line. So, I don't think that the incoming administration is very supportive of that, but they may look at it and go, okay, I'm going to leave that in place. They probably wouldn't have done that on their own, but it's certainly some positive. So there's some give and take there. The thing that the one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is taxes, and that's a big focus for us. And the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2017 expires next year. So big focus for us because it has an impact on the industry and impacts on people individually. That one's not going to be that easy because I think some of the new incoming administration want to dramatically lower interest, the tax rates even more. But I think there's some others who are like, well, wait a second, we're just going to dramatically add to the deficit. So that one's going to be an interesting play. If there had been a split House and Senate, you would have had what I call a more balanced negotiation. So I think it could be positive, but there's some things that are landmines in there that people could pay for things that could be a negative to our industry, right? They have to, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut this tax rate, but we're going to take away this over here because that actually helps pay for it. That could be detrimental. We have our finger and pulse on some of those things. It's not worth getting into them right now, but there are some aspects there. The one last thing, which I do have quite honestly a big concern is, and that's ending conservatorship. And that says releasing Fannie and Freddie from conservatorship. There's no upside to that, right? And I would bet I could sit down with a group of people on this call. Most people like, what does that even mean and who cares, right? So if they get that done, it's going to be a big, who cares that you got them out of conservatorship? It's been working okay. We have access to mortgages, and to the degree you do anything to the negative of that, If you raise interest rates, you make it harder to get a mortgage. That's a net negative. And so, there's only downside risk in doing that. But they started talking to us about this months ago, and it's something that they're focused on. And I just, in the back of my mind, I have a concern that just to get it done, we hope that it's not just that, but it's something more constructive, with the idea there that at minimum it leaves the marketplace neutral to what it was before.
Well, Dave, I've just got one last question, and that's the, some of the things that we saw with the FCC that the Biden administration was pushing on them that was going to have a heavy impact on being able to offer the bulk internet agreements.
Yeah.
You think that's in the grave at this point?
Yes, I do.
Good.
Right, because that wasn't a final rule, it was proposed, and even if they finalized it like next week or something, there's something called the Congressional Review Act that they can look back 60 days and Congress can vote on it and say, we don't agree with that rule, and they eliminate it, and that agency can never propose that rule again. So
gotcha.
There's just nothing going to get done before the new administration gets sworn in, and that rule is not going to happen. So
great.
A net positive for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dave, thanks so much for the extra time, and of course all the value that NMHC brings to us. You guys provided at the Student Housing Conference back in October, kind of a preview of both sides of depending on which administration, as well as many of the Congress members that they got in, things to be prepared for. I don't think it swing any votes one way or another, but I think it definitely it's a good, if you're a member of NMHC or you attended, I would definitely log in and download that PDF presentation, because it provides a little bit of a roadmap of some things to expect. So thanks for all the work that you guys are doing, and we'll see you next month.
All right, thanks.
Great. Well, Rich, speaking of events, we've got one more coming up here at the end of the year, which is LeaseCon TurnCon. Wanted to bring you on, as a lot of the kind of details of the agenda have been worked out. I wanted to bring you back on and kind of get an update and make sure we remind everybody to be in Charlotte December 9th and 10th.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, no, we're excited. We've made some wrinkles to the agenda this year, added some new elements, which I think are going to be pretty cool, which we can talk about in a minute. But yeah, I mean, if you're involved in leasing and marketing and operations in turn, this is a really good event to be at. You'll be with a lot of peers. You'll learn a lot. You'll have a good time and have some good networking as well. So we hope to see as many people as possible in Charlotte on the 9th and 10th.
Well, great. And I know early bird special is obviously ended, but as far as group discounts, are you guys still providing that?
Absolutely. If a company wants to bring 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, we are happy to try to incentivize them to do that. We've had a number of folks take us up on that, which is great, and I hope that more decide to as well.
Well, great. And I know we're not even to December yet, but I did see the announcement that everything is open for for submitting for the Innovator Awards that will be given out at the Interface Student Housing Conference in April. I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it starts April 9th.
Yes, we'll actually be formally announcing or sending out an email announcing the conference. But yes, it's April 9th through the 11th, JW Marriott in Austin. Again, look for an announcement next week on that. Registration will be open, room block will be open, all that kind of good stuff. And yes, the Innovator Awards, the portal is open. Mostly the same categories as last year, pretty much the same. Happy to answer any questions that people have, or Randy Sheeran as well throughout the process. But yeah, the Innovator Awards, there's been a lot of great work being done, so we anticipate a lot of good entries coming in. Great.
Well, again, LeaseCon TurnCon, December 9th through 10th in Charlotte. We will. I should have put the link for the event page in the notes, but I will do that here shortly and paste them into the comments. But they can always go to studenthousingbusiness.com, and there's typically a banner or something that's got those events there, and you can find it that way. Anything else, Rich?
No, just to say that we have some cool stuff going on. It's actually kind of almost a nice lead into what Charlie's going to talk about next. But at LeaseCon TurnCon, we're going to this year for the first time have some regional roundtables that are specifically talking about what's going on in leasing in the 5 markets that College House identifies, Northeast, Southeast, et cetera. So I think that's going to be a cool element. And then I think we prefaced this before, but you, Wes, will be moderating a panel of real, live, actual student residents talking about their experiences in finding their student housing and signing a lease and being marketed to, and then, of course, their actual resident life experience. So that's going to be fun. It's always interesting to bring our actual end users of the industry in front of everyone, in this case, the student resident. So that's going to be pretty cool as well. So LeaseCon TurnCon is going to be a lot of fun, and hope that we'll have a great turnout in Charlotte.
Well, great. Well, we will see you later. And Charlie, welcome.
Adios, Rich.
Hello, Charlie.
I will be at LeaseCon TurnCon. Be there. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, great. Well, Rich, we appreciate it, and we'll see you next month in Charlotte.
Thanks, Wes.
All
Thanks
right.
for the
Have a great
opportunity.
Thanksgiving.
You too.
All right.
Wes, I got to get you a new picture, man. I look like a child there, even though I am a child. But
just make sure you get a haircut before the next headshot.
Wow, already throwing bows here. It's cold and raining outside. I get a pass today. It's actually freezing in my office too. So excited.
Wait, we've got a great panel that is today that I want to start bringing up here. But while I'm doing that, let's go ahead and jump into the summary of. I guess this is, I think, November 4th.
Yeah. So 10 days ago. So if you received you can check our website, check LinkedIn. We post all this information on those various channels. But nationally, pre-leasing. Again, we're going to get a little bit more boots on the ground view from Sarah and Kristen here in a moment. But to preface this, last Shop Talk, we were kind of in that limbo phase where some had started, some had not. In this report, it's about 750,000 beds, give or take, that had started. That's actually more than years past. Again, I think things are starting earlier and earlier and earlier. So you're seeing a little bit more in the subset from a perspective of properties that have started. Couple of things that stand out here. Seeing some strong pre-leasing out there in the Midwest. Last year, if you recall from the year-end report, that was the only region that actually outperformed from an occupancy perspective. We're seeing a little bit of lags on the Southwest and the Southeast, the Northeast, plus or minus 8 basis points there. Not a full point behind, give or take. So again, similarly, in line with last year and then the previous leasing cycle, 22.
Well, just a quick flashback. So last year, this was probably, I think, on November 13th, if I remember, was the report date.
So give or take, a couple days here or there from the information. What does that say down there on the bottom left? So that also, I think that was from the biweekly report, but I think we didn't start seeing what I'm going to call the FAFSA slowdown until kind of March and April. But last year, velocity was off the charts, again, ahead of the record year of 22. So if you want to play the math there, again, you're a little bit ahead of the previous 22, a little bit behind from last year, which again, got off to a ripping start. And rates, we've seen primarily Southeast, Midwest, the last couple cycles have been the strongest. We are seeing a little bit of a slowdown from a rates perspective on the Southwest side. I know, we've talked to multiple markets there, a good amount of supply coming into some of the larger markets in Arizona, as well as, some of your larger markets in Texas. And again, the West just getting off to the races there. Only, a marginal change there, but Still, again, if you look at from a historical perspective, again, given in this 4-year run of a 30% decrease in supply, I mean, there's some strong enrollment growth. We actually have a whole new, enrollment/university information module going out this week on our platform to help give more insight into kind of where things sit for fall 24. But, we're still seeing strong enrollment growth at a lot of these tier 1 universities, which is driving a lot of the demand. And again, we got some supply challenges, but ultimately, still strong there from a rate growth perspective. Again, previously, you're at 844, you're at 936, 10%, 11%, give or take.
Just to show the comparison to this time last year, 10.9 versus a negative 5.3 this year.
Go back.
Is that no? I'm sorry, positive. It's supposed to be a positive.
That's your slide. That's not my slide.
Yeah.
Positive.
It's supposed to be positive. Yeah. It's a positive 5.3 compared. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, continuing to kind of see the trends upward. I will say as we look at some of the floor plans here, the one thing that is standing out on this is from the 4 bedrooms. Again, the largest subset of beds, beds per unit type that we track here. You're seeing a little bit of a decline there from a leasing perspective. If you look at the last the last couple of years of development. That's probably about 70% of the unit mixes at a lot of those. So you're seeing a little bit more increase in a lot of these markets, the 4s. But your 2 bedrooms, which is, again, the second largest from a standpoint of supply standpoint, are, performing relatively strong, plus 1.5%, 1.2%, excuse me, from previous year. And then if we look at from a rates perspective, again, pretty consistent across the board, percentage wise, again, dollars wise, fluctuates. But you're still seeing from the 3 bedrooms a little shift in demand. I think, our panelists on our pre-call mentioned a little bit of that in some of the markets. But, one thing that stood out there is, again, if you look at the rates from a 2-bed, just nationally, again, markets are nuanced, but, you're about 200 and almost, whatever that math is, $200 cheaper for adding an extra friend to live with you. We talked about some of the 10 bedrooms and some of the new properties, but from a 2s and 3s, I mean, that's a pretty sizable gap from a affordability standpoint. So seeing a lot more interest in that subset. You've got a mix of older properties from a value add plus new developments that have that unit type in the unit mix. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. But continuing to see similar performance from a leasing perspective. And again, from a floor plans, we're early in the cycle and we'll continue to see how that builds. But that's what the data says. Let's bring on our panelists here to talk about what's happening, in these respective markets. We got 2 great panelists here, represent pretty large firms that are doing a lot of cool things. So let's let you introduce the crew.
Yeah, Sarah, let's start with you.
My name is Sarah Maxson. I am a senior manager of sales and leasing for our stabilization and operations assets at Core Spaces. I'm doing this is year 10, which is very exciting. So I've been doing this a while. Happy to be here and excited to talk all things pre-leasing.
Great. Kristen?
Hey, everybody. My name is Kristen, and I currently serve as a senior director in our operations group at Greystar. I'm based in Athens, Georgia. At Greystar specifically, we currently own and manage across 78 different universities, overseeing approximately 139 properties and 80,000 beds. My specific role, I have the privilege of leading a team of senior directors, and regional property managers who oversee about 20,000 of those beds in 29 different markets. Specifically, my biggest concentration is in the Midwest and Southwest, but virtually span coast to coast.
Well, great. Well, let's first of all get that comment up there from Brooke, and so it's not hiding your face, but
she's one of mine, so you can probably tell.
Well, hey, thanks so much for spending today with us and kind of giving us your on the ground perspective on things. We had a prelim call on Tuesday to kind of go over what what Charlie just shared, and so you guys had a little bit of a preview to that. And kind of my first question right off the bat, what markets, and not specific properties, we don't talk about specific properties on ShopTalk, but which markets are giving you any kind of concern in regards to year-over-year pre-leasing velocity?
I'm happy to go first. For me specifically, because of my major focus, of course, markets like Minneapolis and Madison are top of mind for me. But really just taking a step back and looking kind of at the broader Greystar, there's a couple others that come to mind, including Tempe, Tampa, Tucson, Athens, none of which are probably surprising given where that market might have ended, if it has new supply, if there's an enrollment story. One thing when I look at these, I think it's just important to note there's not really a one-size-fits-all reason why we might be focusing on that market. So take Tampa, for example. We couldn't start our lease launch when we anticipated. There was a big thing that happened there. There were hurricanes across the state, and that really disrupted our timeline, right? So now that game is really just monitoring, are we getting back on track? And then once we get back on track, are we rebounding and performing like we should? Another one is Tempe, right? If you look at the numbers today, the market is pacing somewhat to last year. But the reality is this time last year, we were already seeing softening from the prior year. And of course, Tempe just didn't make it at the end. So we're watching that one closely to make sure that we're making that up, not just pacing in line with same time last year. So those are some of mine.
Great.
Yeah. I have one that we're looking at. We have 4 assets in Atlanta, which is also where I happen to be based out of. And the market's 9% behind year over year. So we were looking at, why that might be. And we talked to the property staff, and based on feedback from the properties, there's been a shift in on-campus living trends, which I don't think is unique just to Atlanta. I think universities are allowing larger and larger freshman classes, which means traditionally upperclassmen who would live on campus are now being forced off campus because universities can't just put up these giant new living dormitories as quickly as I think they'd like to. So a lot of these renters are very price conscious. A lot of them have scholarships that only allow them to pay for on-campus living and not off-campus living. So they're having to navigate that as a new challenge. So while we've seen an influx in prospective renters in the Atlanta market, they are extremely price conscious. And with all the new supply in a city like Atlanta, the teams have had to shift their focus to some of the smaller universities like the HBCUs, Clark Atlanta, Georgia State. We've had to shift our focus to get onto those campuses a little bit more heavily than we traditionally have in the past. We're still doing really well, but I think it's just kind of like that marketing mindset shift of we can't just focus solely on the university closest to us anymore. We're having to look elsewhere. And that also goes for international students. So, our 4 products in Atlanta are 4 very different products, but we're now all targeting the same groups of individuals, trying to kind of make up that difference of those price conscious renters with all of the new supply that's shot up in Midtown in the last 3 years.
So let me just, to stay on, what you're seeing this year as far as traffic, is, based on what you're observing in the market, not specific properties, is it generally down year over year? And, what type of factors may be, again, just talking about traffic, not talking about points on the board with leases, but what type of trends are you seeing with traffic?
I'll go quickly. We still see pretty good traffic across our entire portfolio. I think we have a little bit more, boots on the ground efforts. So we're getting out, we're street teaming. We have a lot of digital ad running as well. So I think our traffic trends are actually in line, and if in some cases better than they were year over year. So we're definitely still seeing the interest, which is great. We're just now competing in a lot of our markets with additional supply. So it's just, how do we differentiate? But I still think traffic trends are strong, and closing trends are remaining strong with us for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlie, Go ahead, Kristen.
I was going to say I would agree, and I think we're gonna kind of talk about it, but that resident experience is drawing out a little bit, and people are participating in that process for a little bit longer. So it starts with the traffic, starts with coming in the door.
Yeah, Charlie. As far as from the College House platform, I love opening up the dashboard and kind of getting that list of markets that are, performing year over year. Anything on either side of the spectrum this year that has surprised you or worth noting?
It's interesting. Like one of the big questions that I get from a lot of people is like, hey, the markets that were, had challenges last year, like how has things kicked off, right? And I think, something that's, you couldn't forecast a hurricane. There were some challenges in Tampa specifically, but like a hurricane doesn't help. A lot of the Florida markets had a little bit of a delay because of that, but hard to kind of tell. Again, I'm going to say this and everybody's going to be like, no, duh, but every market, you've had a lot of supply. Again, there's not a lot of supply nationally, but a lot of markets, you've seen a lot of new supply that, again, it was, open season in a lot of them, like a Madison, Wisconsin. 4 new deals in the market. That's, 4 new properties that have a renewal base. So definitely probably changes the dynamic there of that market. You're looking at some of your more prominent universities in kind of bigger states, so like a Texas. You're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in some of the markets that may be tier 2, right? Still large student body, but again, it's just a little bit nuanced, right? I think, Kristen mentioned Athens. Our football team is not that good anymore. Just going to go ahead and say that to everybody. But, you've seen a lot of supply kind of.
You fell on the sword before I had a chance to.
I fell on the sword. I'm a man of humility. When we're not good, I will say it, but we have been good. We got to get rid of Carson Beck. But in the line with Athens, you've had a lot of new supply, whether that's large projects or smaller projects. Like there's another 180 bed deal that's leasing up now. So you're seeing kind of the pockets. And again, I think the one thing that I can't remember who mentioned this on the Shop Talk, but the leasing experience, the groups on the call and everyone the technology has made it a lot easier, right? The renderings I saw in a lot of the new devs I thought the building was built already, right? So the students have a lot more information on the renting side, which I think is, yes, we're, in line with the velocity, but I've, just all the different, the less friction from getting them in the door. And again, they're doing tours like we've talked about on our pre-calls and taking a little step further now that we're not in this COVID era. But I think that there's a lot more information. They're understanding, last year, hate to say it, there were a lot more concessions being given out, which again, may be waiting out and be like, oh, I don't have to make a decision that quick. So a lot of different things that the last, call it 24 months have brought on it, but hard to look at a trend. There's a couple universities and a couple markets where the supply demand imbalance is so great and enrollment's ripping that the market's, 80% already, that again, you're 22% ahead, like an old Oxford, Mississippi, who just beat Georgia, but neither here nor there. So yeah,
that's a perfect segue to my next question. Is at the end of last season, we saw a lot of gift cards and other incentives being introduced. Saw a lot of folks that were, decided to pull back on some of their top tiers that they were going to, that they were planning to pull the trigger on because, be it FAFSA or whatever the reason was, we started seeing a delay in February and it lasted all the way through June through August. It came roaring back from what the data is telling us. But I'm curious, how is all those things that, operators were doing last year, how is that impacting what you guys are kicking off with this year?
Yeah, I think that, certainly, I think everybody got caught up in the concession war last year and it got aggressive. I think everybody was just trying to meet the student where they were in the process, not knowing with FAFSA or if they had confirmed to where they're going to the university. Certainly, as we enter this cycle, we're starting to see really that goal of occupancy take a little bit of a precedent over rate growth for most owners, I will say. So there is a strategic attempt to burn off some of that concession, but also realizing there's an appetite appetite out there to still deploy in certain markets, very market specific. The concessions are proving, at least on our end, to be critical in some markets for renewals where their net effective just got so low last year that you don't want to send them out into the market shopping again. So we're having to spend, some time and money on that. So I think looking ahead, just despite if the applications for FAFSA open up late or hoping that we won't see universities push back confirmations, we're just aiming for earlier housing decisions to be made by students. And there are investors out there that aren't willing to wait, right? They want to use that and deploy that concession now and go ahead and capture and then start to normalize as we see those housing decisions get made. So at least for me, at the end of the day, I think really it's just understanding your ownership group and are they hungry for occupancy, hungry for rate? What are they in, and making sure that goal is in your driver's seat to what you're doing with concessions.
Are you hearing anything from roommates or students at least at other properties that said, well, hey, I signed my lease in October of last year, but my roommate ended up getting a gift card or whatever, maybe got the same rate, and signed in June or July. Are you guys hearing any of that?
Yeah, that's unavoidable. You look at a market like Austin that had such a new supply delivery with really aggressive concessions, and it's hard to avoid that. I think that's where you're just trying to make the decision on the right end to set that rate and that kind of renewal or early lease incentive to say, hey, we're not going back from this. This is the best deal, and it's going to be up to the consumer whether they believe us or not. But yes, absolutely, it's hard to not create hesitancy in some markets where it just became a little bit of a bloodbath there at the end in some markets.
Yeah, one of the things we did this year to anticipate that hangover was we rolled out renewal and new leasing earlier. And it's kind of like, I call it like the Christmas curse, right? It's like every year I feel like Christmas.
Sarah,
yeah.
There's just really quick. There is like some major feedback or something going on. I don't know if you just need to adjust. Maybe you got something close to the microphone or something.
Nope.
Okay.
Do you still hear it?
Yeah, it's just when you speak. Might be worth like muting and unmuting, or I don't know.
Is that better?
Not really.
Roll with it. You got it.
What she's gonna say is they started rolling out renewals, like basically like at move-in, it's like, here's your renewal offer. That's kind of where the markets are heading. When I started in this industry 16 years ago, we started after Thanksgiving break or after Christmas, and that, to kind of take away that sting, you're seeing that not happen anymore.
Yeah. I want to go to my next question, and Sarah, I definitely want to make sure that that we hear from you. So if it's bad, but it's not completely intolerable. So.
I'm going to change locations because I have a professional mic and I'm going to go grab it. So I'll be right back.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, hey, I want to, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to murder this name. This is a question that I kind of had though, but Nickel Mishra is asking, how are students' preference changing between student-centric properties or multifamily housing? And, I'll share the question I had for you guys that is very similar. Here we go. And, maybe they saw it in other areas, but specifically in urban and metro markets, we saw a lot of students who were leasing at conventional properties that were further away from campus, really just due to lower rents because of the supply that was there. Are you guys still seeing that? Are you seeing some of those folks that said, hey, I'll do a 2-mile commute in order to, maybe save a couple $100? Are any of those folks coming back and saying, yeah, it wasn't worth it?
Yeah, so I thought about this one a lot. In my opinion, I think it's still too early to tell, really. I think we're still early enough in the cycle. There certainly were markets that we saw a shift to where those concessions, we just couldn't compete with it, and they were willing to move that distance. One that came to mind for me is Boulder. Boulder was a market where there had been some really aggressive rate pushes just year over year. And given how high rate had gotten, we did see students leaving to go to the conventional market, and were willing to kind of drive into Boulder where the university is. I mean, I think this year, when I think about that market specifically, there's some really positive enrollment trends at that university. There's certainly a more strategic kind of approach to leasing at the beginning of the cycle. So there's a lot of hope that students will return to that purpose-built. That, they've made the 2-mile drive, right? They've done that every day. They've had to find the parking spot. They've had to do all that. And I think there's some hope that now that we've kind of got the right pricing and incentives, that will pull them back. But I do think it's a little early to tell in some of these markets.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'll couple it. I'll throw in a couple tidbits of information on that front. I mean, I think your urban markets where you've seen a lot of this supply, like Sarah mentioned Atlanta, like I live here too. The student housing brings a different shade of yellow and orange and green to the 75 drive that you make to the airport. But I mean, you have a lot of options, and especially, towards the latter half of the leasing cycle where the conventional lease terms align and there's vacancy. I mean, you've got a lot of these properties offering 2 and 3 months free. They got to get the occupancy as well. So it's again, later in the leasing cycle, probably more of a piece of the puzzle. But even in some of these markets where like a 1-bedroom, like if you really want a 1-bedroom, you don't want to live, but the stuff pedestrian to campus has increased. Again, demand continues to go up for the smaller unit types if you're closer to campus. In most markets, I mean, you might have to drive out. So again, everything's market specific. I don't think people are leaving, again, most markets, again, I'm going to make a blanket statement, but I don't think that many people are going to be driving 10, 15 minutes away. But, a couple miles, if you're outside of pedestrian, like you still got to drive, you still got to park. So at the end of the day, it's how much of a price decrease can you get? And we saw in the year-end report we put out that the delta between 0.5 to 1 mile and 1 to 2 was not that different. Again, you still have to drive or take some sort of transportation to campus versus walk. So
yeah, I'd like that.
The place of an answer, but I think you either pedestrian or not, and then your options increase.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that graphic. I don't know if you're able to do it for next month or not. But hey, as we're closing things out, Sarah, I'm gonna pick on Cord just a little bit here.
Is this better? Is this mic better?
Much better.
Okay,
Much better.
great.
Thanks for. I'm a little offended you didn't bring out the professional mic to get ready for this, but
well, the lighting is like not as good in here, and so I switched locations to have like a solid background, and should have brought the mic with me.
So let's talk about marketing. Like I said, I want to pick on Core a little bit because my weekends, I now have a little bit of it's not anxiety, but I'm checking out Dan Goldberg's LinkedIn post about these resident events that you guys are doing. And we're not talking about Taco Tuesday and Waffle Wednesday.
Sure not.
Here's one. A couple months ago, you guys had in Knoxville, you had Peyton Manning.
Sure did.
And that was and it was Barstool Sports. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's gosh, I didn't see this. I didn't see this. I didn't see this post here from JJ. And just like that, Jordan Vardabedian is a core. That's great. But then this past weekend, I see this one where Lee Bryce was at the pier.
Yeah.
I've got one of there's an accounting office next to my office, and the owner's son is lives at the pier. And
nice.
I actually heard about this even after I saw Dan's post. So these are some pretty incredible, off the chart events. Is it paying off?
Yeah. There's a lot of thought that goes into an event like this. And I have to tell you, Katie Darnaby and our marketing team, both digital and physical marketing, are just phenomenal groups of individuals who, without, we could not make things like this happen. So I have to give them their props before I go into it. But, in both markets, both in Knox and Clemson, we're building new products. So Knoxville, we have a new development, and then at the pier in Clemson, we brought in 914 new beds. We're pushing 2,000 beds at these communities. And so we saw an opportunity
for larger activations to drive traffic to our communities to close on. So in Knox, a market in which supply continues to enter the market year over year, given that we were delivering over 1,600 new beds, we wanted to ensure that we could create buzz around the new development. And we saw an opportunity to bring Peyton in, and it drove quite a few bodies to the property. I think we ended up signing over 200 leases from that event. So that was huge for us. That property is almost full for next year. And for a new development, as I'm sure many people on this call are aware, that is a tall task, no matter what market you're in. So that one definitely paid off. And then as a Clemson alumni, it was fun to go back to the pier. The pier was there when I was in school at Clemson. So it's fun to go back 10 years later and see that Core has kind of reinvigorated the legacy that is the pier. It's this huge community. It's like a city. If you've never seen it, it's a very cool place. On Google Maps, it's enormous. So
Yeah.
It was fun to kind of go there, and we brought in 914 new beds, and it has a unique location in the city. It's not pedestrian. There's been a lot of pedestrian supply in Clemson. Everybody knows about the pier, but they don't necessarily know that we've brought this beautiful new clubhouse. We've reinvigorated all of the amenity spaces, and then we built all of these new modern townhomes. And so we decided, how do we get bodies to the property? Because once they see it, we have a very high closing ratio there of almost 50%. So we took a look at how could we engage our residents with a specific lifestyle view? And Lee Bryce was that answer. He's an alumni, so Clemson has a deep connection to him. They play his music at the football games and stuff like that. So, we as Core are always looking for new ways to bring that kind of just excitement and buzz around our community. And I think that bringing students to the property is the best way. And we're finding more and more that students want to see, touch, smell the experience before they commit to it. And events like this are paying dividends in spades for us in helping promote the type of lifestyle they're going to get at one of our communities.
Gotcha.
It's been fun. It's been real fun.
I wanted to jump more into marketing, but we are at the top of the hour. And so I'm going to call a little bit of an audible. And I would love to have both you and Kristen back on, not Shop Talk. Let's set up a time and talk about, my next question, was really around this. And, but I'd like to kind of get you guys back. Let's record a podcast and kind of talk about this. But, this was my big question. Now that the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, are you having to change your marketing and leasing strategies as well as spend? Mm-hmm. We talked about this on the prelim call, and you guys actually surprised me a little bit.
Short answer is yes.
Yeah, it really kind of surprised me. So, let's just tease it now. I'll get with you guys. We'll come up with a date. We'll do either a live webinar or we'll do a podcast recording, and let's talk about that, because there's a lot of things I want to jump into with you guys on that. So well, guys, thanks so much for of course the time that you spent on helping us produce this. Charlie, have a great Thanksgiving. We'll see you, as well as Sarah and Kristen, and we'll see you guys at LeaseCon. I hope. I know, Charlie, I know you're going to be there. Sarah, Kristen, you guys are going?
I am not.
I'm not.
Yeah, Jordan's speaking though on a panel about some sales and leasing stuff, I think. So she'll have a lot of good insights too.
Well, fantastic, guys. Well, this is the conclusion of Shop Talk for November. Next month, it will be on December 19th. We're doing it about a week later just because of everything going on with LeaseCon, TurnCon. So join us on December 19th. Guys, if you've gotten any kind of value out of today, which I hope you did, please share Shop Talk with your colleagues. You can just have them go to shoptalk.info, and down towards the bottom, you'll see an option to actually register to receive our email invites. And so that way, each month, they typically get 2 or 3 emails just letting them know when it is, and of course, a link to register. So please, if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Guys, again, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks so much.
guys.
Bye.
See ya.